So good afternoon. The Office of Research and Publication, or the ORP of the UP College of Mass Communication, welcomes our critics, colleagues, guests, observers, and students to this very important occasion. Cinema in the Philippines has by now had a long history, and recent changes in local cinema have been remarkable. Certainly, film criticism in the Philippines is not static, but is continually developing, partly in response to the changes in cinema, but beyond that and more important, as a discrete field. Given these contexts, the ORP believes that it is an opportune juncture in history to reflect on the poetics and practice of film criticism in the Philippines. As I've mentioned, in alphabetical order, so may request Mr. Nick Ocampo to read this paper first. You may choose to read here or there. So I can say I have a... Yes, sure. Sorry, let's welcome Dr. Chomson.
Allow me to speak from this rostrum because I need to see the PowerPoint that I prepared. So I'm one of those who submitted a paper, and I may, with your indulgence, exceed the 15-minute rule by going to 16 or maybe 16 minutes and 30 seconds. So please allow me to read this. So this roundtable discussion, can we go back to the first slide? Has given me the opportunity to reflect on the kind of film criticism that I write. Mine is a type of criticism which comes from my historical writing. So actually, when I'm seated there, I'm thinking if I really belong to this group, because I really strongly feel that I need to identify myself with history, but I think there is criticism now that's coming out from what I've been writing. So my form of criticism critiques the way cinema has been framed by local film historians as something that is already ideologically constructed as Filipino, rather than seeing it framed as a material phenomenon fraught with complexities, rooted in material reality that complicates its identity. In this presentation, my singular focus on the historiography of Dr. Bienvenido Lombera, who I will fondly call Bien throughout this essay, will serve as an example of my critical writing. This essay is a short version of a longer one that I am writing on the history of film criticism in the country. Before I proceed, allow me to state my approach towards film criticism, if indeed that's how you can call it. As mentioned, the criticism I write results from a historiographic work. More significantly, my criticism is informed by a cultural materialistic framework. It is a reaction towards any form of idealism that locates culture change in human systems of thought rather than in material conditions. This is a strange observation to make, as some of our historians manifest progressive thought in their criticisms, although I maintain that they remain as idealist critics in their framing of the country's cinema history. Their idealism lies in their belief that cinema is already essentially Filipino. Their writings exude with a priori assumptions regarding cinema's identity while superseding the material evolution forming cinema's phenomenological growth. Contrasting myself from their position, I take the view that before we call cinema Filipino, we must first ascertain the material origins of the medium. In short, I take a materialist, rather than an essentialist, position with regards to cinema identity. In doing so, we may be surprised to discover how non-native forces and foreign influences helped construct the cinema we have come to cherish as our native cinema, our national cinema. This kind of criticism can only result from a close study of the medium's material history. Its process entails a focus on observable, measurable phenomena, or the ethic, that's right, the ethic approach, rather than on an ideational or emic approach practiced mostly by critics, who take a less than holistic approach towards their study of the medium. As a historian who believes on the materiality of cinema, I adhere to the belief that technological and economic aspects of cinema play a primary role in shaping its identity and development, and not the other way around. With cultural materialism, I aim to understand the effects made by technological, economic, and demographic factors in molding cinema's structure and superstructure, in scientific rather than ideational methods or ideological constructs. My film criticism, therefore, is concerned and informed with historical process. My writings have shown that preceding the formation of film's identity is the material condition shaping its evolution and construction. In the case of cinema, I find any pronouncement of Filipino cinema highly problematic. Although difficult, I prefer to question such ideational claim and reconfigure it to be one of inquiry by asking questions like, what is Filipino in cinema? When did cinema become Filipino? Instead of taking a nativist path that locates cinema in the mindset of critics, or the emic approach as mentioned, I take a stand to inquire about the growth of cinema in the country based on observable and measurable reality as mainly done by historians, or the ethic approach. This difference in approach can be seen in the perspectives taken by our two camps. While earlier writings have placed the emphasis on the study of Philippine cinema on national identity, as if cinema was already Filipino even during its initial stages of development, I restate the issue by proposing that we study first how cinema became Filipino. As a historian from which my criticism is derived, I am concerned with how cinema came to be Filipino, investigating its process of becoming in order to deduce its state of being. This for me is a better option, although a difficult one, than to merely accept cinema as already Filipino. It is a belief that fuels my writing of a 5-volume history of cinema in the country. To illustrate the process of historical criticism that I practice, maybe that's another way to describe the kind of criticism that I do, historical criticism, allow me to focus on the writings of Dr. Bienvenido Lumbera. The reason I chose Bien's historiographic writings is because he was among the first to present a clear program of inquiry into film historiography among our local film scholars. He was the first to embark in writing self-reflexive articles on film history. But having said this, I hope I will be allowed, especially by Bien himself, to constructively critique his historical construction as it is wanting in its investigation and therefore problematic in its framing of local cinema's identity. To start, I would like to recall Bien's 2 seminal essays that showed his interest in film historiography. In 1976, and by the way, these are so far the only 2 that I thought I was able to find and I thought could primarily frame Bien's film historiography. So in 1976, Bienvenido Lumbera wrote a seminal article in Sagisag entitled Kasaysayan at Tunguhin ng Pelikulang Pilipino, the History and Prospects of the Filipino Film. In the article, one can already see his major concerns regarding the medium's history, what forces shaped local films, and what were its prospects for development. Serving as a major undercurrent in his article is the theme of nationalism, one that he would personally espouse in many of his writings in literature and cinema. 5 years later, Bien wrote in the Diliman Review another article, Problems in Philippine Film History. It deals with problems of film history, continuing his running theme of finding in film a site for native identity. Although his first article makes mention of history, it is, disappointingly, less about history than criticism. For while the critic turned historian bemoans the retarding effects made by forces like Hollywood on local cinema, he fails to concretely provide us with material evidences to convincingly prove his point. At best, his essay provides an opportunity to construct Philippine cinema as a subject of historical inquiry in self-assured ways that cannot be mistaken to be other than being nativist. He is able to do it by contraposing native cinema against alien forces, but which, sadly, fails to unmask their tacit ways of colonial cultural subjugation. His article could have been more liberating if only he had been more of a historian than a critic. Vacillating between his 2 roles as critic, he gives us a critique of the effects cast by foreign influences. But as historian, he falls short in providing evidentiary proofs as to why Filipino cinema remains underdeveloped, except for his general statements about imported Hollywood technology and Western influences stunting the growth of local film culture. one issue we can tease out from his essay is also that of dependence, a topic which Bien, as critic, abhors. But how we can get local cinema out of its state of dependency, it would have been helpful if Bien provided us with answers to questions like, how is native cinema dependent on foreign influences, technologically, aesthetically, financially? What social dynamics allow this dependence to prosper? Answers to these questions can provide us with concrete material proofs that will make us realize that the much vaunted identity that is Philippine cinema has its myths. By not providing material details of our country's dependence on foreign film technology and capital and their local machinations, we are unable to know under what foreign and colonial conditions does our native cinema wage its struggle to become the national cinema that we claim it to be. In failing to know this, it will be hard for us to understand and perhaps to liberate our cinema against the hegemonic control of such an alien medium. Our unproblematized popular acceptance of nationalist cinema makes us fail to account for the foreign aspects of a Western medium that is continually shaping its local globe. While we note that Bien's nationalist film history has been, can we go to the next, at the core of his critical thinking, we also note that this has limited his historical perspective. His notion of a national cinema forms only half of the argument for a liberative understanding of cinema. His lack of articulation to account for the other half of the cinema, what may be deemed as its non-nationalist or foreign, colonial, non-native, Western, international side, makes it difficult for us to achieve a holistic understanding of the real conditions and material state of this native cinema, as well as the actual oppression and struggle it needs to overcome. It is in his second article where Bien embraces the task which historians do best, engaging in historical periodization. But in doing so, two historical accounts of great importance are ignored as he excises them from historical memory. Not surprisingly, these two events, which he largely omits from his essay, cover periods of foreign colonization. The first are the initial 20 years of film's colonial origins and formative beginnings under the Spanish and American colonizers. And the other is the war interregnum under Japanese military rule. Sadly omitted in this first is a whole chapter of early cinema that Bien dismisses as, and I quote, veritable prehistory, of which dates to represent film's originary events, to the naming of which meant to represent landmark breakthroughs in introducing the medium, down to the choice of what films to pioneer the beginning of this cinema. All these point to a history that favors film's native emanation, while choosing to be silent about the greater material forces, mostly foreign, fueling its advance in the country, i.e. the so-called colonial and foreign attributes, counting among them Western technology, capital, and modes of production. Like choosing one's memory of a past, Bien too becomes selective in his process, desiring only to construct a native cinema. He omits the crucial formative years that need rightly to be seen as colonial and internationalist. One must realize that this early film period, no matter how problematic for a historian to articulate, or even how politically wrong for a nationalist to adopt as a position, became the very bedrock for what only in time would become the Filipino cinema we presently know. Bien's framing becomes tainted with a history favoring only a local perspective at the expense of actual material realities revealing of local cinema's foreign dependencies. This makes Bien's historiography inadequate. His nationalist ideological framing of film history, which silences its colonial origins and ties, is only able to tell us half of local cinema's story, and thus also half of its history. The other half aches to be told if we were to know all sides of our film history. I can mention two examples that will show the historical omissions. One is about the contributions made by American pioneers in industrializing the studio system in the country, and the other is the period of World War II. Bien fails to first of all name Western personalities who caused the industrialization of local filmmaking through the establishment of Philippine films set up by two Americans, George Harris and Eddie Tate, in 1933. He instead extols local companies such as Exotic and LVN, but disregards the country's reliance on foreign film dependencies or importation. It is through the silencing of examples like this that makes it difficult for us to know how our cinema became highly dependent on colonial ties, enough to question the nativeness of this national cinema. In brief, it was foreign capital, technology, and aesthetic influences which dictated the formation of the larger base of this nascent local movie industry's material and cultural infrastructure and growth. There is another omission, again, made in a pattern involving the lack of articulation of colonial relations. Last 2 pages. While attributing to World War II the destruction of the local movie industry, the history of cinema during this brief period of Japanese military occupation remains unarticulated. During this short span of time, the native cinema, hardly out from the shadow of Hollywood, was cut off from its offshore patron. Yet no matter how traumatic this period had been, I find it necessary to mention what happened to the nascent film industry in the hands of the occupying Japanese forces. In doing so, one will find out the reasons why within the decade after the devastating war that the local movie industry almost miraculously recuperated from hopeless destruction and even reached its so-called golden age starting in the mid-50s. While those instances I mentioned are significant issues that need to be answered, I do not wish to create here an impression of favoring foreign film forces over the emerging national. Far from it. What is being vigorously proposed here, is an effort to know materially what contending forces surrounded the growth of native cinema and not to ideationally and ideologically isolate its growth from the Western dependencies and foreign influences swaddling its development. This is a simple case of facing and presenting reality, and historians, as well as critics, have the supreme duty to do as best they can to present the varied sides of reality for a more truthful narration of Philippine film history. Otherwise, getting only one side of a story will result to a view that will be solipsistic, and in the end, impoverished of a truth that will be necessary to see the object of its study, i.e. the native cinema, in its interdependent relations with a wider global market. Missing out on several salient historical points, Bien has positioned our understanding of an otherwise very international, very cosmopolitan medium to that of the native. For this, we are grateful to him for giving cinema a native face, and we appreciate him for his efforts. He too has been amply rewarded and recognized with the awards and recognitions that have been bestowed upon him. For it was indeed daring and revolutionary for him to insist during his time an agenda of nationalism while the world around him was consumed by Western forces that shaped local, economic, political, social, and cultural life. But there is another side to Bien Lumbera's historicizing of cinema, which this essay wants to bring out. It's what he left out of his historical writings, and which we need to take cognizance of if we were to truly know our film history. This essay asks for a history that will be more true to what actually happened, without losing sight of the perspectives for the local, the native, and the national. This essay has been written for the sake of having a history that will make us attain a deeper historical understanding of the filmic phenomena that do not isolate Philippine cinema from the context of film's international origins and continuing foreign domination, from which this cinema continues to struggle and coexist. We must address and redress issues beyond the borders of a nationalist understanding of film's history that only limits our understanding of the medium as merely a strictly local affair. In closing, I cast no doubt that Bien has gifted us with a film history which, despite its imperfections, has allowed us to build cinema's past. By omitting some parts of that past, he actually asks us to participate in filling it up, in helping him with its construction, and in making the cinema whole. I am grateful that Bien did not write a perfect film history. For in that imperfection, all of us have a chance to contribute to its writing, have our own say in its intellectual rebuilding. It is how we add to Bien Lumbera's project of constructing film's history that we are able to affirm the importance of what he did, not only for the history of cinema, but more significantly, for our history as a people. In doing our share in this historical reconstruction, we will see for ourselves the challenges, perhaps also the folly, in trying to attain our own cinema and of writing about our own history. And this is by no means an easy task, knowing that we are all standing on the shoulders of a giant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Our next critic is Dr. Patrick Flores.
Salamat sa invitasyon ito at wala akong PowerPoint, wala rin akong paper, so pero meron naman akong sasabihin. So I have 4 points kasi inisip ko na round table ito, so maganda siguro may mga trajectories na pwedeng pag-usapan, no? So I have 4 points as entry points for this roundtable discussion. I start with a very fundamental question. What is film criticism? No? Siguro dapat pag-usapan ito. I sketch out 4 aspects of film criticism. No? For me, film criticism is a mode of inquiry. So may questions itong inilalatay. Number 2, it's a procedure of explanation, meaning may technique of analysis. Thirdly, it's a proposition of judgment. So nag-uusga siya. So film criticism is an act of discrimination in many ways. Because the critic is supposed to be discriminating. So that habit of being discriminating inevitably leads to discrimination. And we have to live with that power and also with that moral obligation, I suppose. And then, number 4, it is a gesture of writing. So, ang film criticism sinusulat. So, kailangan tingnan din paano sinusulat. No? O kung marunong magsulat yung painting. Okay. So for this, in the context of these aspects, I ask the question, how is film criticism different from other ways of generating knowledge about film in the form of film theory or film history? Or more broadly, in the context of art history or art theory? I ask because I come from that field of art history and art theory, of which film is a specific articulation. Also, how is film criticism different from common opinion or commentary? May pagkakaiba ba yun? Yung film criticism at saka yung pangit yung pelikula or hindi magaling si Padilla. So may pagkakaiba ba yun sa katulad ng paper ni? So sa tingin ko yung film criticism assumes a level of specialization. So I think I'm committed to that. That it assumes a level of specialization. There should be methodology of argumentation. Meron din siyang disciplinal accountability. May latitude for speculative thinking, and my academic aspiration. I'm committed to those in relation to film criticism. And then finally, with regard to this question of film criticism, I think we have to revisit our conceptualization of critique. What to us is critique? What is critique? And of course, the conceptualization of film. What is film? So that's the first point. The second point is that, as Nick has already alluded to, there is a material condition. There's this obligation to context and there's commitment to context. There's a shift in physiology from film criticism to critical practice in film. I think that's a crucial shift because of the need to flesh out the context in which this criticism plays out. So if we talk of critical practice in film, let us say in the Philippines, we might want to ask the following questions. Who writes it? Who writes film criticism? What's the background of the person who writes it? Number two, how is it treated? Is it treated in English, in Filipino, academic language, in ordinary language? Number three, for whom is it written? And who reads film criticism? And then four, why is it written? And five, where is it written? In the newspaper, magazine, in the blog. So I think these questions will take us to a better picture of critical practice in film. And I'm going to answer all these questions. I have only 15 minutes. And then and then my third point is history of film criticism in the Philippines. Here I begin to sketch out some, because this hasn't been written. This hasn't been written yet. So, and I think it has to be written. I think the first strain of film criticism in the Philippines or commentary would come from journalism. I think we were talking about, we were talking before about Litiarco and Didier Kawili. They were journalists. And so that's the first strain, like journalism and accounts of practitioners too, like Salumpides wrote. So formal journalism and accounts of practitioners. Number two, the second strain would come from award-giving platforms, initially organized by writers. The Maria Clara Awards, for instance, was organized by the Manila Times, and FAMAS as a group was composed mainly of writers. So the first, the initial, efforts came from writers. And then the third, of course, is the manunuri ng pelikulang Pilipino in 76, in which we saw the first self-conscious use of the word critic. Kasi linagay na yung manunuri. So yung Maria Clara kasi wala namang ganun aspirations, I think, to the word. So there's a self-conscious use of the word critic, and there was a variety of approaches offered by the manunuri ng pelikulang Pilipino critics. And one of the articulation of that variety came from Dr. Lompera, which was already discussed by Nick, no? So sa within the manunuri, marami ring mga approaches yon. So pwede natin tingnan din yun, no? Halimbawa, yung lalagay sa context ng film sa history of culture and related forms, no? So like Dr. Johnson and Dr. Lompera would talk about the relationship of film with literature and theater, and also in the context of the larger Philippine culture. So dito lumalabas yung question of identity na malaking usapin, no? So what is it? Is it native? Is it global? Is it local? Is it national? Is it post-colonial? No? Again, I will not answer. Hindi na ako sasali sa gulo. So yun. Ang pangalawang strain na nakikita ko within the manunuri ay yung materialist critique and semiotics na naging strong din naman. If you look at the work of Petronilo Daroy, especially yung review niya ng Daluyong at Habagat, parang makikita ninyo doon yung parang an attempt to appropriate Marxist critique in relation to it. And then interesting din yung review mismo ni Alice Guillermo, who used to be a manunuri member ng libro ng manunuri. Also challenging, posing some questions in relation to the methodology of the manunuri. Specifically, how identity is seen in the context of colonial theater. So, yan, nasulat naman yung mga yun. So, meron ding strain na yung tinitingnan yung film as logic of practice in the context of industry dynamics. And I think that yung nag-exemplify ng ganitong methodology ay si Joel David. That tinitingnan niya yung mga films as parang may logic kung paano ginagawa in the context of the career of the director or the genre, for instance, developments within history, and also in relation to the dynamics in the industry. And then finally, aesthetics. No? Si Emmanuel Reyes wrote something, Filipino film aesthetics in relation to film. So this could be further explicated by a study, no? In the variety of approaches within the manunurids. And then number 4 string would be the independent cinema movement, which of course Nick Campo is a stalwart. Okay, so dahil nag-hain ito ng new aesthetics in film, nag-require din ito ng new ways of describing filmic form. So I think importante i-revisit yon, no? I-revisit yung independent cinema movement and how it informed the vocabulary of film commentary in the Philippines. And mahalaga din yon because link yon, independent cinema movement sa contemporary art. Example nito yung practice ni Kidlat Tahibit, for instance. So, yeah. So yun, hindi pa nakikita yun. Yung link ng independent cinema at saka yung contemporary art. Kasi parang hiwalay. At saka yung video movement, performance art. Anyway, that's for another symposium. And then meron din yung transdisciplinary approach that was also one of the impulses in the formation of the Young Critics Circle. Yung pag-hain ng iba't ibang approaches. Because the members of the Young Critics Circle also came from different disciplines. So, and they brought to the table different approaches. So, different trajectories, different archives of reading, different references. No? So that's my third. And I come to the final point, and about film, I think for me, the format of the review is the dominant form of film commentary in the Philippines. Hindi naman talaga film criticism dahil wala namang film journal. Diba? So yung review. So what is this review? No? So, isipan natin yun. It usually appears in the newspaper, in the magazine, and more recently in the blog. No? So the film criticism is embodied by the reviewer, no? As accessible versus the critic who is seen as difficult or even obscure. Yeah. So may mga problema dyan, as we have, I think the Young Critics Circle has already encountered some problems about this, that the difficulty in the language provokes hostility. I don't know why, but there seems to be, theory seems to pose a threat to a certain levels of comfort among readers of critical text. So, pwede rin pag-usapan yung issue of language dito. And then thirdly, yung review ngayon, parang it's really this generic opinion making na nakikita ko. Almost punditry, a kind of punditry. Parang, maybe punditry is a loftier term. But it is that, I think. There is also, I notice, a cult of the amateur. The cult of the amateur. I'm not saying that exclusively as a negative term. A cult of the amateur or the autodidact. Like the self-taught reviewer. Or informed commentator of film, I suppose, because of prolonged exposure to the material. Gelatis. So they call the amateur or the autodidact. Also, there is the gadfly, the glib bite maker, soundbite or otherwise. And the grouping. The grouping. Kasama sa film festivals. Within a large or extensive creative industry na kasama yung entertainment, design, art, music, so parang may halong hipster culture din dyan. So parang gano'n. So I end this with an article that Doreen Fernandez wrote in the 90s, yung Plea for Critics. I think yun pa rin ang plea ngayon. There should be critics writing. And the lack of film critics in the Philippines is part of the general situation. Wala naman din. Mas okay pa nga ang film, mas marami pang nagsusulat tungkol doon. But if you look at dance or theater or music or theater, architecture, wala rin yun. So criticism is really, has been neglected as I feel in Philippine culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. Our next critic is Dr. Ellie Gill.
Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Dito na lang ako yung medyo hirap akong tapos. Okay. Dalawa ang papel na babasahin ko. Kanina hanggang ngayon nag-decision ako kung sa dalawa. Anyway, yung una naman ay 4 minutes. Okay. Nanggagaling naman ako sa isang perspective ng pagsulat ng mga kwento at sa perspective ko na naging bahagi rin kahit paano noong 1980s ng tinatawag noon na independent cinema or mas tawag pa noon na alternative cinema. Okay, yung una ay on criticism. Pinipili kong isalin sa Filipino, pero hindi ko maisalin sa Filipino kung sinusulat sa Ingles. At aminin ko ito ay nailabas sa unang critical series ng Departamento ng Broadcast. Okay, ito ay tinatawag namin ngayong si Del Pilar. Okay, so on criticism. Criticism interrogates. It interrogates our individual and collective experiences with meanings. There are meanings that detain us in the prisons of our oppressors. And there are meanings that tell us which truths are more preferred under the contingencies of our present struggles. The challenge of criticism is to know the covariances, similarities, and differences between and among meanings. To know how to untangle the hidden power of meanings. To know how power is embedded in those meanings. To know how that power can be unleashed to bring our social lives closer to the world we are redreaming. And to use that power to birth the possibilities of a just future, not in the future, but into the present. Criticism allows us to create new metaphors that speak of the turmoil of the present. It is always provocative. For to be complacent about the colonization of our empirical and imagined realities by unjust discourses and social practices is to invite tyranny and oppression. Criticism shatters. It shatters the shibboleths of our silenced lives, the deep silences about the wrongs of society. To challenge those silences has often come to mean courting tragedy. Criticism challenges those silences. It breaks silence free from its silence. It prefers breakthroughs that break down debilitating silences, and in the process, rejoices in the breakdown of unwanted silence. Criticism is not about answers. It is about questions. The aim of criticism is to offer sheaf after sheaf of provocative questions that negotiate the terrains of the wrongs and the wronged, and the terrains of the wrongdoers. Why is there too deep a silence about the wrongs of society? Perhaps because we have been comfortable with the answers, and perhaps have been too negligent to ask. To be comfortable with answers is again an invitation to the discomforts of a morbidly terrible silence. Criticism is about asking. It is not enough to have answers, no matter how approximately true the preferred truths to those answers come out to be. Answers should always continually take the form of questions. In short, for us, for me, criticism is a festival. It celebrates provocations, welcomes incitement, agitates the world. It is a festival that celebrates war against those who lacerate the soul of the unjustly wounded. Criticism fortifies the collective heroism of our anonymous revolutions. So basically, yun yung aking poetics sa criticism. I-apply ko ngayon ito sa isang lagi nating pinapanood ng mga pelikula ngayon, indie films, at hindi ko naman sabing napapagabag, pero marami lang akong tanong na gustong i-pose sa ating lahat sa mga bagong henerasyon ng indie film. At muli, tulad ng aking poetics, gusto kong shatter, gusto kong not exactly mangwasak, gusto kong maghanap o magbigay ng mga challenges. Okay. Ang tawag ko dito ay mula Indio, ang pamagat ay mula Indio hanggang Indi. Kakaibang kaindihan. Marami ang nagsasabing ang independent cinema ang magsasalba sa kasalukuyang industriya ng pelikulang Filipino. Subalit bilang isang kritikong nagmumula sa loob ng akademya, ay madalas akong mawalan ng pag-asa sa pangako ng tinatawag nating indie films o underground o alternative cinema o ano pa mang kategorya natin sa mga ganitong uri ng pelikula. Totoong nagpamalas ang sineng indie ng kapangahasan sa transformasyon ng produksyon pang pelikula. Subalit ang ganitong gawain ay isang aspekto lamang ng sine. Hindi ko rin matatawaran ang mahalagang ambag ng mga indie films o ang mahalagang ambag ng pagsulpot ng mga bagong festival na nakafocus sa mga indie films. Hindi rin kayang tawaran ang mahalagang suportang pinansyal para sa mga pelikulang nagpapakilala bilang indie. Ang pagsulpot ng maraming pelikula buhat sa mga individual at grupong nagsasabing sila ay indie. At ang pagbawagi ng maraming indie films sa iba't ibang international film festivals. Totoong maraming pamamaraan at estetikang hinahawan ang fenomenong ito. Subalit sa aking pananaw, maituturing na nasa iisang kulma pa rin ang kalakhan ng mga inaakalang alternatibong pelikulang binubuo ng sine ito, na kadalasan, para sa aking pananaw, ay siya ring diskurso ng mga kasalukuyang may hawak ng di makatao at di makatarungang kapangyarihan. Maaari kong sabihin na hindi sapat ang nagaganap na produksyon ng pluralidad ng mga pananaw at opsyon para sa isang makatarungan at makataong ugnayang panlipunan. Buhat sa mga pelikulang commercial at indie pareho. Liban marahil sa counter-discourse ng mga sine ni Nakita Tahimik, Nick de Ocampo, Roxley, at ng mga committed filmmakers, lalo na nung panahon ng batas militar sa bansa, tulad ni Joey Clemente at Lito Chongson. At sa bagong pangako ng, para sa akin, mangilang-ilang filmmakers sa kasalukuyan, tulad ni Pepe Jong. Bihira akong makapanood ng mga indie films na may malinaw, lapad sa lupa, at alternatibong kamalayang politikal. Sa madaling sabi, pangangahasan kong sabihin, hindi alternatibo ang diskurso ng kalakhan ng mga binabasagang sineng indie. Kung tutusin, ay tila mas makabuluhan pa ang ginawang pakikisangkot mula sa loob ng commercial film industry ni na Ishmael Bernal, Lino Broca, Mike De Leon, Mario O'Hara sa paglikha ng mga makatarungang alternatibong pananaw sa buhay at lipunang Filipino. Sa paglikha ng mga karanasan ng mamamayang Filipino na isinasapakete sa pelikulang indie, mahalagang tanungin ng mga manlilikha at tanungin natin mga manonood ng sine kung saang panig tayo kasangkot sa kasalukuyang pagkibagang politikal at kultural ng bansa at para kanino at bakit isinusulong ang panig nito. Kung ang mga pelikula, maging ang ating mga pamantayan sa panunuri ng pelikula, kung hindi sumasabay at nakalapat ang mga ito sa alyansa ng mga komunidad ng kaalaman at komunidad ng interes, no, na nakabate sa katarungan, walang kabuluhan ang ating pagka-indie o ang tinatawag kong ka-indihan, ang ating indigeneity. Sa aking pananaw, hinding-hinding indie ang pelikulang indie, ang filmmaker na nagmamalaking siya ay indie, at ang kritikong tulad ko, gusto ko isipin kritiko ako, no? Hindi pa yun ako. Na nagpapaka-indie kung hindi lihis ang ating posisyon sa diskurso ng mga kasalukuyang nasa kapangyarihang politikal na ang agendang pangkaunlaran para sa bansa ay hindi nagtataguyod ng katarungang panlipunan para sa mga nasa laylayan ng kapangyarihan. Kung ganito ang kalakaran, ang kaindihan, ang ating indigeneity ay hindi pagkabansa ng mga walang kapangyarihan. Konti na. Ang kapangyarihang lumikha ng isang makatarungan at makataong mundo ay sentral sa ating hangad na maging ganap na tao, na isang kolektibo ng mga individual na gustong muling ibalik ang buhay sa buhay. Kung paano ito magaganap ay nakasalalay sa kung paano tayo nakikisangkot sa ating mga kontemporaneng buhay. Uulitin ko na nabanggit ko sa una, ang mga posibilidad ng bukas ay wala sa isang fossilized na nakaraan o sa isang romantikong kinabukasan. Ang mga posibilidad ng kinabukasan ay lagit-laging nasa sa kasalukuyan. Kung the future is always present, or the possibilities of the future is not in the future, or are not in the future, the possibilities of the future are always present in the present. Kung paano isa sa praktika ang pananaw na ito sa mga usapin ng ekonomiya, politika at kultura ay isang panibagong pakikibaka. Bahagi ng pakikibakang ito ay ang muling sulatin o isipiliko ng mundo, muling gawing mundo ang mundo. Hindi kailangang iligtas ang mundo. Ang kailangan marahil, ayon sa isang paborito kong writer, si Ben Opry, sa kanyang librong o nobelang The Famished Road, ay muling mangarap ng makatuturang mundo. Iyon para sa akin ang ibig sabihin ng buhay at committed na independent filmmaking. So, yung dalawa po yun.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff.
Napunta ako sa tinatawag na yung film criticism. Dahil sa aking naging karanasan bilang isang probinsyano na dumating sa Maynila at nag-aral sa isang universidad. Nung ako'y dumating sa universidad, inakala ko na yung mga kabataang kapanahon ko ay may katulad ng gawain na aking kinahiligan sa probinsya. At ito yung panonood ng sine, na sining Tagalog. 1950s ito. Nang ako'y dumating sa universidad, nakita ko na maraming kaklase ko walang nalalaman tungkol sa mga pelikulang Tagalog. Noon, kinahihiya ng mga kabataang nasa universidad na sila ay may hilig manood ng Tagalog, yung tinatawag na Tagalog movies. Wala pa salitang baduy noon, wala pa salitang bakya. Ang daming nandoon na yung pagtingin na nakakahiya ang ikaw ay malamang nahilig sa isang gawain na pang-probinsya, na small town. So, dumating ako sa universidad ng gano'n. Sa aking pagsusulat tungkol sa pelikula, may nagkaroon, ang naging layunin ko ay una, akitin yung mga kabataang nasa universidad na manood ng pelikulang Tagalog. Ganon din, sa parinlayunin ko sa pagsusulat tungkol sa pelikula ay ipakita kung ano na ang naging buhay ng pelikulang Tagalog, kung ito ay sinusuportahan ng mga karaniwang tao o mga taong edukado. So, napunta ko sa pagsusulat ng mga review upang maipakita sa mga kapanahon ko kung ano ang mga bagay-bagay na dapat nilang pagkukulang pansin sa panonood ng Tagalog movies. Kung ano ang kabutihang maihahatid nito sa henerasyon kinabibilangan ko.
Nangingigalilo lang ako sa labas at imbitahan ngayon. Sakto, may papel ako. So, siyempre sa lahat ng mga kritiko na binabasa ko mula ng bata hanggang ngayon. So, hindi ba panaway ito? So, yung papel ko ay pinaikli ko ng pinaikli para kumasya sa 15 minutos. So, basically, it is a call for a repair for Marxism, film studies. So, krisis at kritisismo. So, simulan ko sa isang CP. So, what matters, therefore, is not trying to establish once and for all which theory is right and which is a load of shit, but only whether or not to continue on the swings and roundabouts of thinking. So, sinabi yan ni Molarkey, isang British film scholar. So, upang magsilbing giya ng diskusyon, nais kong simulan ng maikling panayam na ito sa pagbabalik tanaw sa isang CP na hango sa sanaysay na ang kritika sa panahon ng krisis ng batikang kritiko na si Epifanio San Juan Jr. Anya ukol sa ugnayan ng krisis at kritisismo. Sa gitna ng permanenteng krisis ng sambayanan, ng laganap na karukhaan at paghihikahos ng nakararami, sa harap ng matinding kahirapan ng mga manggagawa at pesante, ng mga biktima ng militarismo at low-intensity warfare, ng mga may kapangyarihan, at sa patuloy na pagsasamantala at panunupil ng mga dayuhan, may tatanong natin, hindi ba't isang kalabisang luho ang papuri nating ginagawa para sa ilang libro? Ano ang silbi ng sining sa harap ng nakaririmarim na kalagayan ng madlang hindi siguro makakabasa ng kahit isang librong may tatanghal dito? Ano ang katuturan ng proseso ng pagkilatis, panunuri at pagpapahalagang nakapaloob sa pagkakataong ito? So, simulat ito para sa Manila Critics Circle noong 1988. Bagamat tungkol sa libro ang tinutukoy ni Professor San Juan, mahalagang isipin natin na sa kalagayan din ng sine, paano may ugnay ang kritisismo sine sa pangangailangan ng lipunan. So, 26 na taon na ang nakalipas mula ng basahin ng naturang kritiko ang kanyang sanaysay. Subalit tila patuloy na lumalala pa rin ang mga krisis panlipunan gaya ng patuloy na pagtataas ng bahagdan na mahihirap dahil na din sa mga huwad na polisiya ng kaunlaran, kawalang akses ng nakararami sa mga batayang serbisyong panlipunan, nariyan din ang banta ng privatisasyon at komersalisasyon ng sistema ng edukasyon, pagtaas ng kaso ng paglabag sa karapatang pantao sa syudad at kanayunan, paglako ng lakas paggawa sa pandaigdigang marketo, patuloy na pambubusabos sa kababaihan at sa mga pangkulturang komunidad, banta ng US bases muli, at ng isang medyang popular na walang alinlangang dumadambana at sumasamba sa lohika ng kapital. At sa lahat ng ito, ang tanong na nag-uusig ay kanino dapat pumapanig ang kritiko at kanyang kritika. Matindi ang responsibilidad na nakaatang at kailangan pangkuin ng isang kritiko, lalo na't masidhi ang pangangailangan upang magkaroon ng interbensyon at pagposisyon upang mabuyangyang ang mga kontradiksyon at mga nakakubling ideolohiya at puwersa na masasalat sa tekstong kanyang sinusuri. Ngunit sa kasalukuyang panahon ng panunuot ng neoliberal na mga pangangatwiran at kaisipan sa mismong muog ng akademya, tila mismong ang kritiko na imbis na siyang sumasawata sa krisis ang nasa kalagayan at bingit ng krisis, kung kaya't ito muna ang ating pag-usapan. Sa paglipanan ng mga teoretikal na posisyon na inuluan ng neoliberal na katangian ng edukasyon gaya ng pabulusok na pagbabalik ng positivismo, cognitivism sa pag-aaral ng media, o ang pagyapong ng pluralismo, end of ideology, post-history, post-theory, o postmodernism, at kung ano-ano pang mga bagong kaisipang uso, ngunit tahasang mapanganib, ay hindi maitatatuang nasa pakura na natin ang mga kaisipang umangat-ngat at umapansot sa pag-iral ng ating mapanuring kamalayan. Sa unang malas ay kagandang mga pakinggan at tila may bahid ng kontradiskursibong posisyon, ngunit sa ikalawang tingin ay tunay na mga ampaw at mga kanduraning sa lamang kalamang ito para higit na mailayo ang kritiko at akademiko ng ikatlong daigdig sa pakikipagpuno at pakikipagtalapan upang maunawaan ang danas ng kanyang bayan at makapagbigay preskripsyon tungkol sa kung ano ang makabuluhang sining. Hindi makakailangan may ilang mga kritiko sa kasalukuyan na nagmumuwanan sa mga kaisipang makabago, mga teoryang nakakabasag dainga at mga kaisipang hugot at hindi lapat sa lupa, kung kaya't kung papasuriin ang kanilang mga akday, tila mga hukag lamang na haka. Lahat ay nakalutang lamang sa dambana ng mataas na teorya, ngunit sa katotohanan ay mga mapuron na teoretisasyon at ilusoryong posisyon na said sa sustansya. Hindi rin natin dapat talikuran ang katotohanan may ilang mga kritiko sa esfera ng akademya na matagal nang isinangla, ipinrenda at ibinenta ang kanilang panulat kasama ang kanilang paninindigan para sa interes ng yayaring kaayusan, partikular sa interes ng Estado, mga institusyon at negosyo. Sila yung mga mahilig magsulat ng mga praise review, ang mga pen for hire, silang mga walang gulugot at mga kawal ng may kapangyarihan at iilan. Sa kabilang banda rin naman, ginagamit ng ilang kritiko ang mga sulong na kaisipan at kritikal na formulasyon, hindi para gawing pwersa para himukin ang nagbabantang lakas ng isang tabi, ngunit upang gawing sangkalan ang danas ng nakararami sa kanilang mga pretensyosong uri ng scholarship at upang magsilbi lamang na tungtungan pato sa patuloy na pagtaas ng kanilang simbolikong kapital sa hierarkiya ng akademya nang sa gayoy marating ang tuktok ng toring galing kasamang ilan pang lulong sa droga ng kapangyarihan. Mula sa tuktok, tinatanaw na lamang nila sa ibaba ang naghihikahos sa sambayanan. Marami ring nagre-review sa social media, pero huwag na nating pag-usapan yon. Sa kaso naman ng mga kritikong piniling pag-aralan ng kulturang popular, kung saan nakasukop ang larang ng media gaya ng radyo, telebisyon, bagong media at sine halimbawa, mahalagang irehistro na may ambag ang mga paniniyasat na ito upang mabalasa ang mga nag-uupugang puwersa ng kapangyarihan sa mga lunang ito na dati-rati hindi itinuturing na lehitimong sangay ng makabuluhang scholarship.